Today we're looking at this IBM PS2 machine from 1989, a 55SX to be exact. We'll go over the history of these PS2 machines because although they look like regular old PCs, they most certainly are not. They use a proprietary IBM peripheral bus called the Microchannel Architecture, or MCA. And there's a lot of headaches with these things. I don't have a compatible hard drive, and the floppy drive is weird too. Oh, and also, I can't get it to boot. The goal is to get this thing booting into DOS 3.3 or DOS 5.0 off the floppy disk, but in order to do that, I'll have to make some modifications to the clock battery. If we can get this thing working, I'll also go over some future plans for upcoming videos, which involve remote initial program loading this thing, aka net booting, over a token ring network. Let's get into it. I bought this IBM PS2 several years ago, and I am very happy to have it in the box, though it is far from complete inside. On one end, we've got the IBM Blue and the Personal System 2 logo there, and this thing was shipped by Beckons Van Lines at one point in its life. On the other end, we have the same IBM logo, but we do have what might have been the original shipping label. Shipped from ITEL Distribution Systems Incorporated in Illinois to a Sears Roebuck & Co. in California, Pasadena, California, the Sears Business Systems Center. So maybe that's who originally sold it, or they were the owners, hard to say. And like I was saying, far from complete, but we have the original styrofoam that keeps it nice and safe in here, and the keys to the unit so we can unlock it and get the case off. I'm going to pull this thing out of here. Where to even begin? Those of you that know about the IBM PS2 line probably like what you're seeing, at least from a nostalgia perspective, good or bad, but I can almost guarantee those of you that have never seen one of these are at a minimum intrigued. The brutalist architecture of the thing, as it were, and not to mention the serious construction. This thing weighs maybe 15, 20 pounds when you're picking it up all at once. Full metal lid here, and of course, the power switch. The PS2 stands for Personal System 2 and was the successor to IBM's obviously very successful personal computer line that came out in 1981. This PS2 line was IBM's attempt to wrestle the PC industry back into their control because the very industry they created with the first IBM PC was built with off-the-shelf parts. This meant that others could legally come along and create what were called PC clones or PC compatibles. It was possible to assemble your own PC with off-the-shelf parts, and then basically write your own code for the thing until it worked, without ever referencing IBM's code. Compaq is the quintessential example. They legally and skillfully created the first Compaq luggable PC compatible, which while laughable now, was a massive step forward in being able to compute on the road, and one of Compaq's core principles was compatibility, making sure any software out there worked as well on their machine or better than on an IBM PC. In fact, Compaq was so good at this that they contributed back to MS-DOS. I recently just finished Rod Canyon's book, Open. Rod Canyon, of course, being one of the co-founders of Compaq. And if you're at all interested in this PS2 versus IBM PC war stuff, this book is very good, and I'm pretty sure Rod Canyon actually wrote it. The prose is really simple, super easy to consume, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I think a lot of these like famous CEOs or whatever get a ghostwriter. I'm pretty sure he wrote this. I don't know how else to explain it. At any rate, this book came out in 2013, and for the first time ever, he divulges that Compaq had actively been contributing code back to MS-DOS for Microsoft because they had become so good at IBM PC compatibility that in some cases they were better at it than Microsoft. Anyway, great book, easy read, highly recommend it. It's relevant to this PS2 stuff. Because again, in my opinion, the PS2 was IBM trying to wrestle back the PC industry in their old style of, we own the mainframe, we come do your service, you rent everything from us. And the PC industry kind of took off on them and they weren't ready for that. And they wanted to get it back under their control. And we'll talk about why this thing is a little different than a PC. And when I'm talking about PC compatible and the PS2 trying to wrench back the industry, I'm mainly talking about the ISA bus. Industry Standard Architecture. I think even Compaq might have come up with that term to sort of solidify it. And that's this connector right here. This is an ISA card. And a bus is just a communication lane for peripherals. So you might have like several of these cards in your computer, and they're communicating over something software and hardware engineers call a bus. And this is the ISA bus. This large edge connector right here. So this would work in an IBM PC and PC compatibles, on up into the mid-90s until the ISA bus was starting to get phased out. But the PS2 on the bench over here uses something IBM called micro-channel architecture. And as you can see, the edge connector is quite different. It's a lot smaller. It looks a lot more like PCI. I'll talk about that in a second. But it was proprietary, so you would have had to have licensed the right to use this bus, this architecture, and make your own cards. Whereas the ISA bus, anyone with the technical know-how could make their own card and make it PC compatible. And I think it's an interesting lesson in open standards versus closed standards. I think you get more competition and you get better products. It's better for the consumer. I think it's better for the producer when the standard is open. And that's where we are today. There were a bunch of other flavors, but after all that came PCI. So we can put the PCI edge connector right there next to microchannel. You can see it's slightly different. This is a 4 systems ATM card, PCI card. ATM was a competitor to Ethernet. And if you want to know more about that, don't forget to subscribe. But back to the task at hand, it was mainly the peripheral bus that made the PS2 what we would call proprietary, this MCA microchannel architecture. You'd plug your video cards, this is a token ring networking card, and so on, and how you'd expand the PS2. This thing just has a Intel 386, an Intel 386SX, so a low-cost variant, which we will discuss. That's unfortunate, but other IBM models, had 286, 386, 486. You get the idea. This is going to be a good old-fashioned, deep dive, try to look at every aspect of this thing we can, and I'll stream my thoughts to you. So to get the case off, which is quite heavy, saying it was full metal, there are 2 screws on the sides. They've got a flathead and a Torx bit, which I think IBM liked to do. And they're a little finicky, so they're captive. It's called captive, so they don't fall out, which is nice. If we can slide her around here, get to the other one. Another aspect is all these PS2 machines would have a, maybe not all of them, but most of them would have a key and a lock, which I have, so mine's unlocked. And I think some of them, we'll try to take a look and see if this one does, have sensors inside, so it'll notice if the thing's been unlocked or jarred in some way, and it'll complain to you when you start it up. These things are very weird to start up. They don't have a traditional BIOS in the sense that we think about it, so we'll get into that. And then I always have a little trouble. I've only opened this twice, but I think you can slide it back and it'll, angle out like that. Not too bad. And here we are. We'll go over all these pieces in detail after I show you the back and the front maybe a little bit. I suppose we'll start with the important part. The white switch on the front just presses a very impressive red switch on the back that's attached to this very large power supply. I have to guess that's proprietary. The most of the weight from the machine outside of the case is right in this corner, so it's kind of awkward to carry. On the front, we have the very iconic IBM PS2 look, kind of this angle down here with the expansion bays. Mine has a floppy. I'm not sure what type of floppy this is, and there would have been a hard drive here. So there's a spot for it with an LED indicator. Oh, and my friend here really wants to know what this thing's about. What do you think? No? More of a Mac girl. I think all of the, or nearly all of the PS2 floppies have this sort of look and feel. And on the blue eject button would normally have been 1.44, the size of the floppy, the type that it is. And I was kind of bummed on eBay. I bought this machine in 2021, I think. When it came and it had been wiped off, so we'll have to figure out what's in there. In fact, I'm having a slightly closer look, and I can just barely make out indented on it 1.44. So it's I'll call it a standard floppy drive. That's nice. That being said, these PS2 floppy drives are pretty notorious for just not working anymore. So we'll see if this one works. I don't think I've ever tried it. No, I think she's starting to like it. Get out of here. All the static electricity fans going wild there. This is one of the reasons I bought this machine. It's got a VGA port, so I don't have to deal with finding one of those MCA video cards or anything like that. It's built in, which is great. That's probably a serial port, printer, and PS2. So don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure we call these PS2 connectors, mouse and keyboard, that DIN style connector, because of the PS2 line. They might have been the ones that came out with that. That seems logical. IBM spared no expense on this aspect of the case. We've got these embossed mouse and keyboard logo icon things right here. Got a super nice IBM logo right here on the back of the case by the power input. And then the whole back panel uses this really nice IBM grayish color. I think this was pretty popular from the, I don't know, mid 80s to mid 90s on IBM gear. I'm sure we could look up the Pantone color or something. Speaking of looks, you can kind of see the lineage here. So this is a faceplate for an IBM Aptiva from like 1995. Would have just been a normal PC. And it's got the same white, I mean it's the same beige color, but same white on the power supply. IBM maybe hadn't started doing their little light blue coloring yet for this guy, but you can obviously tell, you know, the same designers or the same design philosophy was involved here. We just get the curvier late 90s look going on here. And before we dive inside, on the front, on the right, they usually have like a little asset tag. Knew I'd find a use for these zip drives. Right in there we can see this is a type 8555-061, and so that would have told you like what type of hard drive size this thing might have shipped with. Let's go look that up online. So IBM made approximately 3 million variations of these PS2s, by the way, but this particular 55SX has got an Intel 386SX inside. That's where the SX in the name comes from, of course. And it would have shipped with a 60 megabyte ESDI drive. We'll talk about that. 2 megs of RAM stock, shipped in May of 1989. So this thing has a 386SX inside, which was a cost-reduced version of the 386. The 386 was a 32-bit processor. I think it could address 4 gigs of RAM. This thing has less address lines to reduce cost. I think it can address like 16 megs of RAM or something. So basically, it's going to be an absolute dog. I think technically you could install Windows 95 on this, but you wouldn't want to. We're not going to do that. I was trying to figure out what would have been like era appropriate for this thing, and I think like DOS 4-ish would have been, but I've got this copy complete in box of DOS 3.3, and that came out I think in the mid 80s, and this was 89, but 3.3 would have been really popular even when this came out, so I think this is a reasonable setup. I have no idea if this works. I don't even know if this works, but I'm going to be optimistic here, and hopefully we can unbox this. I can't remember if I or the eBay seller put it in this plastic, but I'm guessing either way it probably smells terrible. Taking a closer look at the key mechanism, I don't see any indication that this is hooked up electronically so that the computer would know in some way that it's been tampered with. It looks purely mechanical to keep the lid on. One last oddity of this machine, all of the capacitors on it are just kind of floating here like this. This does not look like factory work, but maybe that's how IBM did it. It kind of strikes me as having been recapped. If you're familiar with these machines, let me know. Seems kind of weird. Let's talk about the trials and tribulations, there are many, that you're going to experience being an IBM PS2 enthusiast. And it also kind of highlights why this is an interesting machine. It's not just some regular old PC. The 60 meg hard drive that would have shipped with this thing would have been right here. And look at that connector. That is an enhanced small disk interface connector, ESDI, actually invented by Maxtor Corporation in the early 80s. And you're just not going to find one of those drives. I'm in fact counting myself lucky that I even have the cable to plug it into the machine, let alone finding a drive. This era of computers, you would have expected worst case SCSI, but there's solvable problems for that. Best case, an IDE drive. That's probably what you'd be familiar with well into the early 2000s. Notice we've got the Molex power connector on this regular old PC hard drive. No Molex here. It all passes through this very large connector, and that's just the hard drive situation. Here's the floppy drive. What in the IBM is going on here? This is not a normal floppy drive. The power is delivered through the cable. And when I say normal, I just mean more typical. I'm sure this is a fine piece of technology, but you've got the floppy drive ribbon cable here on this typical PC one, and then the little 4-pin power connector right there. Not the case with this one. So those are the first two problems collecting these PS2s. Now, not every PS2 used this, I'm just going to call it proprietary or less common stuff. I think the Model 30, which shared a form factor with this one, might have had ISA, in fact. So you could get all the cards you'd ever want in there. But yeah, you've got this special hard drive situation, you've got the special floppy drive situation, and then that brings us to the star of the show, MCA. This is the micro channel architecture riser board here for the 3 slots this machine happens to have. And you can just tell it's bespoke, like the PC speaker is coming off the MCA riser. The hard drive is connected on this top cable here to the riser. It's all very bespoke, very IBM, very non-standard. And this machine is sort of nerfed by that 386SX. It's got these 16-bit MCA slots here. They did have larger 32-bit. I might have a card I could show you. Here's a 16-bit token ring MCA card I was showing you earlier. This is compatible with that machine. We'll try to install that. But they had bigger ones, so I can only assume this is also just a token ring card. I can only assume this is 32-bit, or clearly you can see the connector is bigger. So they had all sorts of different cards. All of that is to say you're not going to pick one of these up and just slap an SD to IDE card in it and have a good time, or throw a floppy emulator in. You're going to have to do a little extra work. You're going to need some adapters, and a lot of the time there's just no option even for a hard drive. None that are practical fiscally. Anyway, moving on though, this is the CPU, the 386SX. Look how small it is. No heatsink. This is in 1989. What a different time that this is the brains of the operation here. For context, I'll zoom you out. There he is. That's the CPU. Over here we've got the Dallas, the classic Dallas real-time clock. I highly doubt that works, so it's going to complain to us about the time every time we try to start this up, I suspect. Got some IBM ROMs here or something from 1988. So this might be a pretty early shipped unit here. Came out in 1989. Got an empty slot here for something, some sort of upgrade. Way down in there we've got a RAM stick. We'll wait to power it on to see if we can figure out what that's all about. I don't want to tear all this apart. But I did want to show you on the back of that MCA riser, look at these bodge wires. Probably from the factory. So these were mistakes that were made during, the early release of the machine, and someone had to come in. So they'd have like large machines, soldering machines that are manufacturing all of this like in an automated fashion, basically. But then a human would have to come in and put these bodge wires in to fix mistakes. And that's pretty cool to see. So the plan here is I want to power this machine up and see if it's functional today. And hopefully we can run DOS on it without a hard drive. I'm a total DOS noob. Or I should say I've forgotten it all. But I think we can just slap a DOS disk in here and actually, get into DOS and mess around a little bit, all from the floppy drive. And I was thinking we'd use DOS 3.3, but I was digging around on the shelf, and I also have this copy of DOS 5.0, and our 55SX here is included in the system requirements as a compatible system, so that would be era appropriate. The copyright date, at least on this box, is 1992, so 3 years after this machine came out. In the system requirements, it says we need either a 720K diskette drive or a 144, which we have. We've got one of those. And this thing came with 3 720K disks. So I'm a floppy novice, but I'm assuming what they're telling us here is that these 720K disks will work in our 144 megabyte drive. Before we power this thing up, I do want to touch briefly on future plans here for this machine and why I keep showing you these token ring cards. This is an IBM MCA token ring card that I keep showing you, and it's a network interface. Token ring was a competitor to Ethernet. It used these big old cables like this. And I have a couple videos where I'm starting to explore token ring. I have a token ring network working, actually. And this IBM PS2 is definitely, eventually, going to be part of that token ring story. Like I was showing you, I don't have a hard drive, but in this 55 model line of machines, IBM also came out with one called the 55LS. And it didn't have a floppy drive or a hard drive. It was meant to be remotely booted over the network. You would have an operating system installed on a server, and over the token ring or Ethernet network, you would boot into your OS. And so that's what we're going to try to do with this one in a future video, assuming we can get it working at all in this one. This token ring card is specifically a token ring network 16.4 adapter A. Like I was saying, it's compatible with the machine on the bench here. But in order to remotely boot with this card, it needs an extra chip, and you can see right here, it's missing. So one way or the other, I'll buy another one with the chip, or maybe more interesting, and I hope this is the route we can go. Maybe someone has dumped this remote initial program load ROM, and then I'll buy the equipment I need to actually burn that onto a ROM. I don't think burn the right word? Anyway, I've done this in the past, but way back in college, a long time ago. I'll need to buy the gear to do it. I think that would make a really fun adventure, so to speak. But either way, we are going to get that thing remote program loading over a token ring network in future videos. We're going to try to get some signs of life out of this thing. I bought this in 2021, and I almost don't want to tell you how much I paid because I cannot condone this behavior. But I think I paid like 160, 170 bucks shipped to my house for this thing, no hard drive. It's not worth that. But they are getting more and more scarce. I think something that's kind of interesting is that when the writing was on the wall for PS2, I think a lot of these were enterprise machines, by the way. That's what fascinates me. Most people didn't have these in your homes, like businesses were the only ones that could afford these. And it was really clear when these were losing to the typical PC. And I think they just got e-wasted all to hell. So not a lot of these left. I mean, they made a lot of, especially this particular model. But the price is up on these things because I think a lot of them got put in the landfill. Now what we're hoping to see is some sort of error screen or something to tell us to put a disk in, I think. These are not like normal PCs where they have a full-blown BIOS, meaning that on the motherboard there's code to configure the system and choose a boot order or anything like that. IBM took a totally different approach with the PS2. It's got very minimal code on it, just enough to either boot off the floppy or find a hard drive and boot off of that. So IBM shipped what were called reference disks, and they would actually have the BIOS on there, and this thing would know just enough to boot to that. This is not a real reference disk. This is a Linksys Etherfast LAN card disk. Anyway, we'll see if this thing's healthy, and then I'll figure out the right reference diskette for this machine. They were all different, I think, or there was many different variations. And then we'll see if we can get this thing healthy, try to boot into DOS. I powered this machine up once when I got it, and I seem to recall it asked for a floppy disk, which I think is what we want to see. So I've been putting it off long enough. Let's flip the power switch. Fans are on. The monitor's coming up. All right, good. It's doing a RAM check. Beeping, all sorts of complaints. That's pretty typical. It doesn't know how it's configured. What we really want is it to tell us to put in a reference disk, I think. Maybe not though. Let's go look up what 161 and 163 are. I'm just Control-Alt-deleting here for posterity. It does reboot the machine. Yeah, hits the floppy drive, 161, hits it a couple more times, 163 with the beeps. Okay, 3 seconds of Googling tells me this is the time and date being wrong, and I'm gonna need a reference disk that I was telling you about. So let's go make one of those. Your best friend in the world of IBM PS2 is going to be Ardent Tool of Capitalism, ardenttool.com. This is a massive archive of everything IBM PS2 and Microchannel. And here we are on the page for our 55SX, and it has a download for the 5565 reference disk. So this reference disk must have been for our Model 55 here and a Model 65. Like I said, they made a million different models. And so I downloaded the zipped image here. And I should say it's got tons of information. So here we're looking at the 8555SX planar, a later version, which I think is ours. IBM's term for motherboard was planar for some reason. And remember, I was showing you that empty socket on the board, and that is apparently the external NVRAM socket for the 55LS. So that other net bootable model. But yeah, you've just got tons of information, those MCA riser boards, all the different variants and how to recognize them. It's truly incredible. Without folks like this doing this archival work, and there are others doing PS2 archive work, these machines would essentially become useless because of software, which is really scary. The hardware is working just fine, but you can't find the right software. That's the most frustrating thing when you're dealing with these older machines, especially if you got some peripheral that, you can't find the Windows driver. I'm sure you've all been there. So it's just incredible to have these folks that are out here archiving all this stuff for all of us to have access to It's incredibly important historical work. But in the reference disk zip file, and remember, a reference disk is literally a floppy disk that IBM would have shipped with your machine that basically acts as your BIOS, as you'll see, hopefully. I don't know if it's going to work. I haven't tried it yet. It's got a license file inside, and it is the IBM Personal System 2 Reference Option Diskette from 1991. This is what's called a grease weasel. It is a modern device that I can hook up over USB, and I can power and interact with floppy drives, which means I can write a reference diskette for our PS2. I've got the Grease Weasel software here, so I can do Grease Weasel info, and it recognizes it, and then we can do a Grease Weasel erase, and it's going to go off and erase that floppy disk. I can hear it banging away right now on each track. And that's all done, so now we're going to write to that floppy disk, and the format is IBM 1.4 meg. And here is our .img file that we got from Ardent Tool, and hopefully this works. It's writing the tracks. I think we're going to be okay. A few moments later, that is successfully written, theoretically. So we can grab our fresh reference disk here. This is very exciting. When I bought this machine, I didn't have a reasonable way to write a reference diskette to real media. I had like 100 of these, but no way to interact with them. So let's power it on now and see if it loads from the floppy. We're going to hit the power clunk here, counting its RAM. That doesn't take very long because it's not a lot of it. It's banging the floppy, beeping. I can hear it. Okay, we've got a cursor here now. I can hear it continue to hit the floppy periodically. It occasionally makes a noise. It's a yellow light. I don't know why I'm disappointed by that. I thought that would be green. Is that normal? Still clanging away on it. Yes! Look at this. This is beautiful. It took, I would say, less than a minute, but it felt like 20. It's the IBM Personal System 2 Model 5565 reference diskette. 1990 date code, apparently. What a sight. Say what you want about IBM, but like, come on. I want all my machines to be doing stuff like this. Okay, it says enter to continue. That was pretty quick. Battery error. Error appears if computer just installed, battery just installed, battery is dead. F8 to forward. We have 2 errors. Okay, I'm just going to do enter. So it's running what it calls automatic configuration. And so like I was saying, and it's clicking the floppy drive away this whole time. What you would normally do in a BIOS screen, you know, you've seen all those, the blue ones, you do with this reference diskette. And they call it automatic configuration. Oh, it is clanging away. So there's some software on that reference diskette running, trying to figure out what the machine is all about, I think, and get it all set up. So hopefully this succeeds. It says automatic configuration complete. Hopefully we don't actually need a valid battery to run the machine. It's going to restart now. Counting up the RAM. I'm in unknown territory here, by the way. I do not know how to use these machines. Same error codes. That's not good. So the reference diskette might just like do this, might just loop on us here. So we're back here. Granted, I could look at that all day. Yeah, complaining about the same thing. So I wonder if I can like skip this. I don't want to do automatic configuration. I want to configure it manually myself, IBM. It's banging away on the floppy. I suspect we're going to have to replace this Dallas time clock. It's kind of ridiculous you can't run your own computer with like, you know, with the clock dead. That's crazy. Yeah, no surprise. Same screen as before. It does its little automatic configuration and then says it's going to restart. And then that screen talked about a service technician. Real nice. I'll do a little research. So I sort of got curious if I could just pull the chip out because it looks socketed. So I just barely pulled it like a little bit and it popped out. And as I did that, its pins got absolutely mangled. These things must be made out of like tin foil. like I barely I mean, I'm not very careful usually, but like I care about this machine, so I was being really careful, and I just kind of popped it out like that, you know, like any normal person would, and it got absolutely I mean, maybe it was in there bad. I don't know. It got absolutely annihilated. There are replacements for those Dallas time clock chips, but out of curiosity, no reference disk in, no clock at all. Let's see what it does. Oh, it won't even get to the video. Uh-oh. Interesting. So the problem I have here is that these pins are obviously really crappy. Like not made out of very thick metal, so if I snap one, putting them back, apparently the machine won't boot. And I cannot stress enough how much I didn't even do anything to this thing. I like kind of pried it up on both ends and then just pulled, and it went. All the pins just got, and I don't even know how I did this. This is ridiculous. Okay, I got the pins all fixed up. Not too bad. They weren't as weak as I thought they were actually, and hopefully it stays that way. Rumor on the street is for these PS2s, you need to just repair this unit. The third-party ones don't work as well. Apparently, I don't know. So tomorrow, after work, I'm going to go buy a Dremel at Home Depot, and we're going to rip this thing open and solder a clock battery to it. It's the next day. I've got the clock chip back in because I realized I should probably at least try to see if it'll boot to DOS or whatever with a broken clock chip. Because believe me, if I can use this thing without having to fix that, I will never fix it. So let's see. I'm going to pull some disks out of this DOS 5.0 box. In here, I've got the media. The IBM DOS 5.0 preload. Guess that's what we want. Get that in there. Turn it on. Didn't make the clock chip worse. That's good. I can hear the floppy. Oh, okay. It says, not okay. These two codes equal not okay. Read your instructions. All right. I think I remember reading that with a totally broken clock like this, or a totally dead clock battery, the machine won't boot. So let's get to work. I didn't want to have to do this. Just kidding. I'm going to do it by hand. I think it would be faster with a Dremel, and we might be making that trip to Home Depot after all, but we'll try it this way first. I don't want to go buy a Dremel. The idea is, if we take a look in here, this little outer plastic casing is epoxied on to the actual chip, and some folks reverse engineered it or figured it out that if we expose a metal pin in here and a metal pin right here, that is the positive and negative, I'm not sure which one, I'll check, that we can attach a battery to. It's a little more involved than that. We'll see how far I get here. So basically I'm going to carve off right here and right here. I'll pry the little plastic bits off the epoxy, and we'll keep going until we can see some metal contacts, hopefully. Marked off a couple lines with a Sharpie for myself, and I'm literally just gonna cut into it. So I'll be back in a little bit. Okay, at least at this early stage, this is surprisingly not bad. This was like 3 seconds of work here, so I'm making 2 grooves there, and I'll be able to chip out the rest of the plastic with X-Acto knife or something like that. I am just barely starting to see the metal that I'm going to need to solder to. I'm going to start on the other side. I think this little piece of metal is connected to another one up top, so we have to like break a connection to disengage the old battery that's inside. That's kind of the part I'm most worried about accomplishing correctly, so I'm going to start digging away at that side too. I've got both contacts fully exposed, enough for a little bit of solder, I think, but the problem I'm seeing is this doesn't look like the other tutorials online. There was supposed to be another pin here soldered to this one, and I could break that connection so that the old battery inside would just be dead and not part of the circuit, and then you solder the new one onto here. The idea here is I'm going to wire in one of these coin cell holders, and you don't want to have this new battery charging the old one. In fact, if we bring out the voltmeter here and we take a look on these pins, we can confirm there is just a little bit of charge in there, about 110 millivolts. So that is the battery. And that means that negative was on the left. Yeah, it's negative now, so that's a nice confirmation. I don't think I care. I've got a replacement on the way from eBay that I'm going to try out. I don't want to dig any further into this thing. I dug a little further than I wanted, and I'm not seeing what the tutorial was showing. So I'm just going to wire this up. For some temporary testing, it's going to be fine. But caveat, don't do it this way. You know, she's not going to win any awards, but it's done. I checked that I could see the old battery, so my solder points were good. And then, you know, I just slapped a new one in there. That's fine. That's fine. Got to try out some new flux paste, too. That was pretty sweet. Look at that. Certified IBM field technician over here. I can't think of anything that could possibly go wrong. Let's try it out. We have video. That's expected. We're going to have the same problem. Now that's interesting. It didn't get this far before. I had to have like a invalid boot disk in. This didn't show up without a disk. There's no disk in the machine right now. That's kind of weird. So let's pop the reference disk in. And I'm going to hit this with a Control-Alt-Delete over here. And hopefully we can load from the disk and set a date and time. I'm not really sure what's going to happen. It's sort of hard to remember just how slow floppy drives are until you're back messing with this old stuff. Kind of incredible to relive these days. We are here. Press enter. Got the configuration error screen. Continue until the computer automatically configures itself. Okay. It's going to do its little auto configure. We'll see. Says it's done. I'm going to let it restart itself by pressing enter. Moment of truth. It's not immediately hitting the errors. We have different behavior for sure. What the? I feel like it's kind of beeping more too. Yes! Date and time not set. That mod, that's being generous, actually worked. So let's set a date and time. Yeah, we are here. Check this out. So now we can actually get into the options in the configuration diskette and mess around. So this is what I meant by this is your BIOS, basically. You load up this disk. It's kind of an interesting cost-saving maneuver, I suppose. We have 2 megs of memory installed. It understands that it has a diskette drive. That's good. Of course, we don't have a hard drive. No math coprocessor. We knew that. And all our slots are empty. Let's exit. I don't know how to set the time. I've never been able to actually use this machine in any meaningful way. This is very exciting for me. I don't know how to set the time. It does have a test the computer option. Let's let it run its tests. This is really cool. Also, shout out to this floppy disk drive for still working. It makes the most bizarre high-pitched sound occasionally. I keep thinking like someone's upstairs making noise or something. Probably doesn't come across on the microphone. So the first test loaded, and I guess this list is correct. That's what I've got. I'll let it just do its thing. You could say we're kind of gaming. I have to choose a keyboard enter key shape. Oh yeah, look at that. Oh, we're so gaming. Getting through the floppy drive test here, and it wants me to actually put a blank disk in. Something sort of interesting about these days of computing, if you weren't there, is everything on my reference disk is now in memory, right? So I can put a blank disk in and the computer can use that blank disk. It's kind of an interesting concept that you could work without like a hard drive, I guess is what I'm saying. Yep, all done. And now it wants me to put the ref disk back in. Uh-oh. What the hell? That's my reference disk. Oh no. That'd be so funny if the drive like died during testing. I think this computer's pretty healthy, aside from maybe the floppy drive just died. We'll find out. Let's try this DOS 5.0 disk again. Uh-oh. Wonder if that diskette is not bootable. Or I wonder if I need to fix 163. I don't know. We'll solve this problem anyway. It tells you exactly what to do. Main menu, set features. Set features. The time is a feature. Yep. Good enough. I'm going to pop the disk out and see if we get that error anymore. Ah, this is what I was hoping for this entire time. I could have sworn there was this little UI that tells you to insert the disk or whatever. So yeah, once we've set the date and time after fixing our clock, the machine is fully functional again, I think. Check this out. I accidentally bumped like F1 on the keyboard or something. I'm not sure. And I'm in IBM Personal Computer Basic. Let's see, what can we do here? Hello. 20, go to 10. How do I use this thing? No. Run. We're computing. I'm thinking I got a little ripped off and I don't actually have the install media in this DOS 5.0 box. Let's take a look at DOS 3.3 and see if we can't get it to at least boot from a disk. I think I'm still a little in shock that this machine appears to be working very well. I've had it for 4 years. I've just been staring at it in that box wondering if I was ever going to be able to use it, and so far the answer appears to be yes. I bought this so long ago that I have no idea if it even has the discs inside, because clearly I never took it out of that plastic. IBM used to give you like a full-blown binder, and I almost messed that up. There we go. See if we can dig up the discs. This is all how to use DOS. There they are. Okay. Seeing a little bit of, I don't know, moisture, weather, age. Cool anyway. Actually, it's probably the adhesive on the label, the glue on the label, soaking through or aging and discoloring over time. Oh, and check this out. This is a starter disc for a Model 30. Same exact form factor as this one, but it has isobus, and it was older. And I don't think we're going to need that. I don't know the difference between a reference diskette and a starter diskette, but they were kind of the same concept, I think. I think this is what we want. This is our operating system. Pretty cool to have this. It also doesn't smell, which is truly incredible. All the documentation you'd need because there was no internet. This was printed in 1987. And yeah, you would use this to learn how to use your operating system. Let's try it out. We'll throw it in, of course, and flip her on. I'm just blown away every time this starts up successfully. Yeah, all right. That's fine, that's fine. Here we are. DOS. Check this out. I love it. This thing is fully functional, even with its little Christmas tree mod here. This is so cool. In conclusion, I'm starting to think this thing might have worked just fine if I had tried the DOS 3.3 discs, because clearly they're bootable and whatever discs I have in here are not the actual DOS operating system or install discs. And maybe that mod wasn't necessary, but it's done now. What comes next for this thing? Well, I'm thrilled that it works. Again, it's been on a shelf for 4 years. I can't believe that it was just the clock battery. That was a huge win. First things first, I of course did the clock mod wrong. I soldered the battery right onto the old one. Obviously, it's fine in the short term, but I got some replacement modules on eBay that I'm interested in trying out. I've heard mixed reviews, so that should be interesting. And probably not a hard drive in this thing's future. Like I said, it uses an older standard that's not IDE. They're very hard to come by if they even work. There's not a lot of like SD to microchannel options out there, so we'll be going the networking route. I have a fully functional token ring network. We're going to set up a server on that token ring network, which will allow this thing to net boot. No floppy drive, no hard drive required. I of course need to get the ROM that I need on this. I'll either buy one of these with the ROM or figure out how to put the ROM on there myself. I think that would be a more interesting strategy. And that's going to be a whole can of worms doing that remote initial program load. It's absolutely fascinating that IBM was shipping these things in the late 80s with the intention of letting them net boot. Just like think about that for a second. That was quite some time ago. We could of course just run DOS on it via the floppy all day long, but that's not really my cup of tea. So I think the net boot thing is going to be way more interesting. I'm really happy that I was able to restore this thing. I guess I didn't do much, but it's functioning and it works. I hope you enjoyed following along as we brought this thing back to life and learned a little bit about the IBM PS2 history. If you made it this far, thank you very much. And if you like what you saw, I've got all sorts of videos on this PS2, token ring, all sorts of networking and enterprise gear from the late 80s now. I used to say mid 90s, but late 80s to the mid 2000s, technically. So if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. And if you'd really like to support the channel and help me buy MCA cards, I'm on Patreon. I post behind the scenes type videos, little sneak peeks about what I'm working on, and that sort of thing. I'm going to cap it here, call this a success. I hope I see you in the next video.